Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Cramer. Our guest today is Bill Flynn. We're going to talk about how you probably should be firing yourself. We'll get into exactly what that means. But to grow, right? To grow your business, to make more money, to enjoy your life more. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Thanks, Alicia. Really glad to be here. Looking
Have you
forward to
ever
it.
been introduced that way before?
I don't think so. I've done 70 or 80 of these. I don't remember them all, but that's probably a
Well,
new one.
let's start with the basics. So, why don't you start by talking a little bit about your business? You do some leadership coaching, but I know there's a little bit more to that. So, why don't we go ahead and start there?
Sure. So I'm currently a leadership team coach. I say I'm more of a Bill Campbell than a Marshall Goldsmith. Most people don't have any idea who those people are. But Bill Campbell, there's a book written about him called The $1 Trillion Coach, and he was Steve Jobs' coach and Eric Schmidt's coach at Google with Sergey and the team there. He's done lots of things over the years. He was the coach for the CEO of Intuit. He also ran Intuit as well. And he works with the entire team as opposed to an executive coach, which is more Marshall Goldsmith, which is sort of one-on-one, which I think both are extremely important and necessary. But I like to focus more on the team aspect of it, probably because of my previous history, which is I'm a startup guy. I did about 10 startups over 25 years here in the Boston area, all in high tech. Generally, sort of front office kind of stuff, COO, running of sales, marketing, service, that kind of stuff. And then about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided I wanted to do something else. I was certainly loved doing startups, a lot of fun, but I had a hard time finding that Goldilocks founder who's crazy but not too crazy, and working with them. So I had a really good experience as a coach between startups, I think 5 and 6, and I wanted to sort of revisit that. So I did that, and I've been doing that for about 2015, 2016. And so my primary focus is that I work with the CEO or the head of the company, the business owner, whatever you want to call it. And as you sort of teased at the beginning, I work with them to get them to fire themselves from the day-to-day running of the company as much as possible. I used to be a Vistage speaker, which is a peer advisory organization that's worldwide, and I did about 40 or 50 meetings that I was asked to be a speaker in, and I would ask the same questions. I kind of did the same thing over and over again. And I would ask the one question, which is, of these folks, the Vistage business owners are they're larger businesses to smaller business. Some of them are smaller, probably more like the audience that you spoke of earlier on the pre-show. But some of them are really big, hundreds of millions of dollars in size, been around for generations, that kind of stuff. And I would ask them, how much time do you spend working in the business versus on the business? And it was almost always 80-20 or 90-10 in the business versus on. And I said, well, it needs to be the opposite of that. You should be spending a lot less time in the business operationally, because eventually that's not your job anymore. Your job is to figure out what the next few years are going to be like. And you can't do both at the same time. It's your brain doesn't focus on one thing, more than one thing at a time. We have this multitasking thing, it's called, right? But it's actually called context switching. Your brain can quickly move from one thing to another, especially if you're really good at them, but it's not doing two things at once. It's doing one thing very quickly after another, and it feels like you're doing one thing. And we certainly see this when we're driving a car, right? If you're driving a car, you can sort of listen to the radio or whatever, and you're fine. But if you're then saying, oh, I don't know where I am and I need to focus on the neighborhood I'm in, often we turn the radio down, right? Why? Because it's a distraction. And that's because our brain can't focus on that. Same thing in business is if you're in meetings all day and running things and making decisions for other people all day, you don't really have time or the space in your brain to think about what's the future going to look like, et cetera. So that's what I do with my clients at a higher level.
Well, I love this conversation. I joked a little bit before we even started recording about how many business owners are holding themselves back because they're unwilling to do this. They're unwilling to delegate strategically and let go of some of those day-to-day tasks that they probably should not be doing. And that's slowing their growth substantially, in some cases just kind of keeping them in the same old status quo. And there's a huge disconnect for a lot of people who have this true desire to grow, this real sincere desire for creating a better quality of life and a more successful business. And they're the reason that that is not happening. So I'm curious, from your perspective and doing this work for as long as you've had, well, some of the mindset stuff that's going on there when you're coming in to a business and they've already sort of raised their hand and said, okay, I'm in, this is something that I realize that I need to do. That's a huge step. But I'm sure there's still some residual mindset stuff that you're experiencing with these clients, as well as they're sort of wrapping their head around what that is actually going to entail and what that process is going to be.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point, because it's really not their fault. And I don't ever go in saying, hey, you should, I don't, as I like to say, I don't like to should all over people, because that's not fair. We've been, especially in Western culture, we've been brought up that having the answer is what's prized, is what's celebrated. From, grade school through high school through college, it's not the person who says, hey, I have a question, or does critical thinking, or whatever. It's the one who's the professor or the teacher says something and someone gives the answer. They're the celebrated ones. And in business, there's no way you're going to know all the answers. It's impossible to understand all the different aspects of what you need to in a business. You have to have a team around you, if you're going to grow to that, to that extent. But most business leaders we weren't really trained that way, right? We're trained that we have this hero worship thing going on, right? And we celebrate those people more than anything. And to me, like the best leader I've ever come across in 30 years of researching leadership, and really intensely in the last 6 or 7, is this guy named Alan Mulally. Do you know who Alan Mulally is?
I do not.
Right. Most people don't know who Alan Mulally is. And I think he is by far the best leader we've had, at least in the United States, if not in the world. And the reason is that he was the CEO of Boeing Commercial Aircraft in the middle of 9/11. He was also the CEO of Ford Motor Company in the middle of 2008. And both of those companies came out of those existential economic crises for that particular industry better than they went in. And there's a great book called American Icon, which tells the Ford story. It's not written by Alan, it's written by someone else. And he and I are now connected because we have the same philosophy. And I wrote an article about that book and how it connects to what I do and what I teach. And he actually read the article and reached out to me, because he has the attributes, what I think are the mindset of the attributes of what you mentioned, is that he's humble. I mean, he is, he reached out to me. I'm no one. He's asked by presidents to help, in their cabinet and things. And he's asked, he's well known in the world that he comes from. So he's definitely humble. He's a humble, hungry learner who's comfortable challenging the status quo. And, if he tells these great stories about why, what he does, and he says his basic philosophy is, look, nobody's perfect. We're all humans. We're all flawed, but we're here to help each other. And my job is to get everyone working together as teams of teams, not to give all the answers, but to unearth the things that need to be fixed and then find ways to get that done. There are great stories that we can go into on that he tells on those realms, but most leaders aren't like that, at least not that I've come across. They feel like they're weak, or they're not respected, or whatever their self image is if they don't know the answer, right? You have to study and have all the answers, and that's just not possible these days. Things move too fast, information moves too fast, technology happens too quickly, and even such, it's to me, it's like it's I equate it to being able to do the New York Times crossword puzzle on Saturday, which is the most difficult of the week. And if you get one answer wrong, it affects lots of other things. If you get one answer right, it helps you with other things. And usually, unless you're really, really good at it, which I'm not, I do it often, but I have to cheat a lot, or get help. When I have someone else helping me, I can do it faster, et cetera. So it's the same thing. It's a team effort to run a company, because there are so many moving parts that you really have to focus on that team primarily. And I think that's the main reason why most leaders get stuck is I ask, one of my favorite questions to ask is, would you enthusiastically rehire everyone on your team that reports to you now that you know who they are? And very often the answer is no. I said, well, that's one of the reasons you're being held back. Even if you come up with a great strategy and predict the future, if you don't have people there to execute it that can do that without you, then you're having to do it. And that just gets heavier and heavier as the business gets larger and larger. And eventually you get stuck, right? You can't pull that weight anymore by yourself. So you usually hit a wall of some kind. So I think that's often what happens with folks. So you have to have that mindset, being a humble, hungry learner who's comfortable challenging the status quo, which gives you the best chance of having success, whatever that is to you in your business.
So good. I want to focus in on something that you just referenced, because there is always nuances to everything. And those nuances are really the differentiator in terms of the results that you get. So a lot of people think, oh, I'll just hire more people. But now you brought up a really valid point to consider, that sometimes the people that you've hired are not the right people, or perhaps there's certain things that can be done to improve upon that person's performance, because there is that tendency, and I'm guilty of it. I've gotten better, certainly, but hiring people and certain things I can tell are just not their strengths. And so it's just faster to do it myself. Well, maybe one time, right? Yeah. But now I understand that having the right people, or training the people to do it the right way, is a huge time saver, right? And creates a lot more leverage than that sort of default that a lot of people have. Yep. And that's the nuance that I wanted to focus in on a little bit, is it's not just as simple as delegating, correct?
It is not. That's certainly an aspect of it. But so one of the things that I do with my clients is sort of put maybe hopefully not too fine a point on this, is I say, in order to fire yourself from the day to day, and to get the best out of your team, you have to understand what people love doing. And what I mean by love is that and we call these strengths and weaknesses, and I think we look at them the wrong way in terms of strengths, meaning you're good at something. To me, it's better to look at it. It's the thing that gives you strength. It's when you do it, time flies. You're doing it for an hour and you don't even feel the hour. It feels like 5 minutes, versus the opposite, which is the thing that you've been doing for 5 minutes and it feels like an hour, right? So if you delegate that task to someone who it's a weakness, I mean, it drains them, then that's not a good delegation. But if you delegate to someone who loves doing it, is probably better at it than you are, then that's a good delegation, because it gives them energy and makes them more engaged and they're more productive, etc. And that's really hard to figure out, right? Because you have to sort of work with them and understand them and really understand their brilliance, because often we don't know our own brilliance, because to us it's normal. But to someone from the outside, like, how, and I don't even know how you did that. And they're like, and they can't explain it either, because they don't really know how they did it either. So it's a balance of the two things, of them really understanding what gives them energy, and then what drains their energy. So I usually recommend to, as one of the processes, is to do what's called a love-loathe exercise, which is something from Marcus Buckingham, which is, again, when you find yourself doing something and you're getting energy, you love doing it, you're probably good at it, but you don't necessarily have to be good at it yet, but you certainly get energy from it. Write that down, right? And then you have this love column, and then you have the loathe column, and the opposite happens. And then your job as that team leader is to do more of the things that you love, if it makes sense, and to get rid of the things that you loathe by either teaching your team to do it or getting rid of the thing itself. There's another exercise by Rory Vaden, which I applied to this love-loathe model, is for the loathes, you can automate the thing, right? So for instance, I automated my calendar a few years ago because I read somewhere it takes 8 back and forths with someone to schedule a meeting, which just seemed like a total waste of time, right? But it's sort of like, oh, when are you ready? Yeah, I'm ready Tuesday, Thursday. Well, what time Tuesday, Thursday? Oh, probably Tuesday. Well, I can't do it then, or something happens. I just give people my calendar now and say, pick a time. As long as I keep it up to date, I'm good. That's sort of an automation. So you can automate it. You can delegate it, of course, as we mentioned before. You can eliminate it. It's something that maybe doesn't need to be done. You should challenge, we're doing it forever. Does it add value to the business? Or my favorite is you can procrastinate. Just don't do it for a while. And if nobody notices, then you can eliminate it. And so that's sort of the first step of trying to figure out and have your team do that as well. Because one of the things I think folks that we get wrong too often is that we think we can make people well-rounded. And we're just not well-rounded. Human beings are not well-rounded. We're really spiky, idiosyncratic. We're really, really good at a few things, average at a whole bunch of things, and not so good at a whole bunch of other things. And your job is to get them to do what they love and give them strength and what they're good at as often as possible. So you want to try to figure out within your team what those mixes are, so you can make a well-rounded team of people that contributes optimally to the business and to the team itself, right? You're trying to balance those things. And I think that's the fun of being a leader, is trying to figure that out with them, moving people around. And a lot of people say, well, that's not in my job description. And my question is, well, who made up that job description? Some human being at some point in the past made up that this role is supposed to do these things, not in any way thinking what's the optimal use of resources, etc. Often there are many extroverted things and introverted things within a job description, and you're expecting that person to be as good at both of those things, which often that doesn't happen, right? And an introvert loves to do the spreadsheet and put their head down, where an extrovert likes to be out, etc. And when they're having to do the spreadsheet stuff, they're drained and their energy is taken and they don't like it and they suck at it and whatever. So your job is to try to figure out to the degree that you can. I mean, it's not going to be perfect, but as much as possible, because then we have this engagement problem in the world. Supposedly 25% of people are engaged, give or take, at work. That means that 65 to 75 are not engaged, and some of them are actively disengaged, meaning they're working against the production of the business, which so that's terrible. And part of it is this process, I think, is that we don't understand that people are not rational human beings, right? We're all a little crazy. We're all impulsive, emotional, irrational beings, and we expect everyone, oh, I'm paying you a lot of money, you should do this. It's like, that's just not how we work.
So you just gave so many golden nuggets here. Practical things that people can implement in their businesses with, for themselves and with their teams. Now, you also touched on the fact that we're human beings, perfectly imperfect, all works in progress, that there is no finish line, right? There is no perfection that will be attained. That's just not the way that we're wired. It's not the way that we're conditioned. But there is so much greatness within everyone. And a lot of those old models of just hiring someone for a specific role and then sort of expecting that they're supposed to live up to these ideals that you have, it's unreasonable, because that's just not typically the way we are wired. And there's this wave of consciousness that I see coming into businesses, individuals like yourself that are out there doing this type of work. And even the small business who's just maybe hiring their first employee, when this respecting how we're wired and understanding that when someone is doing what they love, it's a win-win-win across the board for everyone, and that there are ways to do it strategically. It's not all just wishy-washy, gushy, rainbows and butterflies. Being a strategic business person does not mean that you don't bring an element of consciousness and heart and kindness and goodness into what you're doing in your business.
Right. Agreed. Yeah. And that's what I sort of teach people is one of the and this is in my book in more detail, but basically I say, look, if you're creating a team of teams, especially if you want to grow, right? And to make that work, you have to understand what are the key functions that each of those teams gives to the business. So marketing does a certain function, sales is a certain function, operations is a certain function, finance is a certain function, et cetera. Really understand that and then break those down into their component parts. And those are often jobs that people are doing, right? And one person may do 2 or 3 of the jobs, one person may just do 1 of the jobs, whatever it is. But as you break those down and you really understand the ability, skills, and knowledge needed to do each of those functional roles, then you can more intelligently and wisely try to fit the right, get the right person to do that, or at least have an understanding that, yes, I'm having you do a number of different functions, and I'm not expecting you to be great at all of them. And then as we grow, we'll start to fill in, we'll hire people to take those things away from you that are better at, we'll try to do that for them as well. But you also have to fit that in the context of the culture, if you will, of the team and of the organization. You have to hire for fit, for people who have similar values. They believe what you believe. They're trying to help you get to where you want to go. Because eventually, to me, that's more important than hiring for skills and knowledge. You can teach skills and knowledge. There's probably a minimum you need to do. And abilities are harder because abilities are generally something that were already given to us by our genes, our parents, our friends, whatever. And yes, you can add ability, but it's usually it's an expensive process to do that, right? If you really want to learn something new and add a new ability, you can't necessarily teach someone to be, honest or to have integrity or whatever, right? They usually come with those values already. And you should be hiring for the ones that you think are the most important, because as your business grows, they're likely going to move around the business and they're going to have to learn new things and learn new skills. So, but you're at least they're people like working with them and they're a joy to be around and they have energy, etc. And that's what I think we do too often is we hire for the skill to hit the road, hit the road running, if you will. And that's good for a few months. Right. And then what happens sometimes is we do that and then people don't like that person. And you're wondering why their productivity is slowed down. It's because, well, everyone's avoiding them and they're not telling them stuff. Or they don't want to talk to them, or they, don't help them in meetings, whatever it might be. So it's these little things that, people ask me all the time, why do you think businesses do struggle and fail? And I say, I don't really know, but it seems to me that we do a lot of things wrong. We just don't do them completely wrong. We do them a little wrong, but then as they add up, right? So we hire someone who isn't a good fit and they become a hiring manager. And guess what happens? They hire people that aren't good fits either. Or we think we know why our customers buy from us. So we go up on that premise and then we find out later on that we're wrong. Or we don't ever find out that we're wrong. And then we're like, well, what happened is why aren't people buying? Because they're not buying for the same reasons that you think they're buying for, right? And I ask this of people all the time is do your customer value prop and share it out loud. And often they say, people buy from us because we're awesome. And I say, look, I have to tell you that people really don't care what you do. They care what you do does for them. So it's not that you're awesome. It's something that you do that's awesome for them. And if you could figure that out, you're in a much better place because now you're speaking their language. They're saying, you get me. And, I mean, Apple was probably a really good example of that, right? They got what a lot of people really wanted, and then they grew from there. IKEA did the same thing, and McDonald's in the 60s and 70s did the same thing, and all these great businesses did really well. Ford did the same thing when Alan Mulally was there. He got rid of a lot of the businesses that had been bought before and really focused on Ford. And by focusing on fewer things, they actually grew faster, believe it or not.
So good. All right, Bill, we are running out of time, so I have to make sure we share with our listeners how they can connect with you. So can you share your website and anywhere else that you want to direct people to find you?
Yeah, the best is my website. It has everything on it. My book is on there. If you want to download it for free, you can, or you can get it from Amazon or Audible. You can book time with me on there. I do also do, and have been doing this for about 4 or 5 years. I do a bi-monthly, I don't want to call it a newsletter. It's really a 1 or 2 minute thing. It's very action oriented. On there, there are like 150, 160 of them already up there around the things that I'm talking about. And that website is catalystgrowthadvisors.com.
Wonderful.
And if you want to hire me to help you do some of the things, everything that I teach someone else can do, I think I'm just more of an accelerator. That's why I chose the word catalyst. It's just, I think you can get there faster by using someone like me. But I'm stealing from Drucker and Deming and Shine and Bennis and McGregor and Porter and all those guys. There are lots of really good pearls of wisdom out there. I just have consolidated them into my point of view in my website and my book.
Well, you're the distiller of really valuable information, right?
I hope so.
I have to thank you, Bill, for being with us today. It has been a lot of fun talking about this topic with you.
Yeah, as you can tell, I enjoyed it as well.
Well, and of course, got to thank all of our listeners doing this for you. So if you haven't subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.